Right. Let me be clear. I really like Brandon Sanderson, and I like his books. I also think he seems like a really interesting, kind man himself, but I do have some hot takes. So let's talk about it. Here's what we'll do here. I have 4 Brandon Sanderson hot takes distilled from about 60, 70,000, it feels like, pages of reading. One of them is positive, one of them is critical, 2 of them are kind of neutral. I should stress, I'm not a Coppermine guy. I'm an idiot. I do not troll the Wikipedia looking for extra supplementary information, and a lot of the stuff just based from the books has probably left my brain. These are just the observations from a layman who's read quite a lot of Sanderson and has some distilled opinions from that reading experience. But anyway, let's get to it. Take number 1. Brandon Sanderson is a short king. And I'm not talking about his height, I'm talking about the length of his books. What I've noticed is that when people are trying to sell Brandon Sanderson to other people, they often advertise Sanderson based on the length of his books. For example, The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, even Mistborn and things like that are quite long in and of themselves. And it's true that some of Sanderson's books are long. Wind and Truth, the longest one so far, is like 1,300 pages long, and you either have to publish it with the tiniest font imaginable or with Bible-thin paper. Those are your choices. Don't know how you'd get that book out in Braille. But the more I think about it, I don't love Sanderson's books because they're long, and sometimes I love them despite the fact they're long. Listen, Oathbringer, really good example. Not just one of my favorite Sanderson books, one of my favorite fantasy books ever written. I reread it last year, I think it stands the test of time. But is it too long? Kinda, yeah. I think you could excise about 300 pages from Oathbringer and you would be missing nearly nothing, if anything at all. And I think actually, by advertising Sanderson as the page count author, we're doing Sanderson a disservice, because what we're doing is we're sort of mentally separating Sanderson's good stuff from his short stuff, and some of his short stuff is also really good. The Rhythmatist is apparently really good. There's a reason that The Emperor's Soul won a bunch of awards. That thing's about 100 pages long. The Stephen Leeds stuff is tiny, fun. Alcatraz stuff, very short, young adult, but very fun. My favorite Sanderson novel of all time is Shadows of Self. That novel can't really press past the 300-page mark in most editions. It's very short, and it's lovely, and it's crisp, and it's got character and theme and twists and everything that Sanderson's really good at, truncated into this tiny package. But again, we don't advertise books like that because they're not the big ones. So yeah, take number 1, Sanderson is a short king. I will stand by that till the day I die. Take number 2, White Sand is doomed. Okay, now of all of the Brandon Sanderson takes I'm putting out here today, this one is probably going to be the most critical, and I would imagine maybe the most controversial. So if you're not aware, White Sand is a Sanderson story that's kind of come in a bunch of different forms. You have a prose version that I believe was Brandon Sanderson's first ever novel. It's not technically published, but he has just put it out there on the internet for people who are interested. There's also a graphic novel format, and there's a graphic audio format, pretty much line to line based off of the graphic novel. And now Sanderson has said that he's going to write a canonized, proper official White Sand novelization. I don't think he's indicated quite if he's going to get to that after Ghost Bloods or before Ghost Bloods, but that is coming soon. But to me, it doesn't really matter because I hate White Sand. I think it's the worst thing Brandon Sanderson has ever put out. I think the graphic novel in particular is extremely half-hearted. The art style switches up halfway through and basically looks like The Simpsons for the last 200, 300 pages. I think the story is a bit tepid. I think the ending is lackluster. I don't find it engaging past those first 50 pages. And this is why I'm saying that this is a controversial opinion, because I know that Brandon Sanderson is planning to rewrite it. And while I trust Brandon for the most part, I can't really see how he can make this story succeed. And I understand why he'd want to put out his official version. You know, it's apparently a really strong part of the Cosmere. There's lots of connections to the Cosmere. There's a character called Chris in this story who is integral to other work set in the Cosmere. But for me, White Sand structurally cannot work. And I know that Brandon Sanderson himself has said that his novelization is going to actually follow very closely with the graphic novel that's already released. And I really hope it doesn't. Because although I'm banging on about how bad the graphic novel is, it's not the fact that it's a graphic novel that makes it bad. I think that plot structurally is a mess. Most of the time we're just following characters in boardrooms who have these powers, but they're just having meetings and things like that. When there is action, it's kind of the samey action all the way through. None of the action sequences feel particularly memorable, and that includes the closing sequence at the end. I think the whole thing, unless it has a major restructuring, is pretty much unsalvageable. And that's why I'm saying White Sand is doomed, because if Sanderson is carrying that story in particular forward, I don't see how he can make it shine. Honestly, I think he'd be better served just putting it to one side quietly and moving on. It's actually quite interesting as a side note, because I've heard Sanderson say that he thinks Alloy of Law also deserves a rewrite. And I would disagree for the opposite reasons. I think Alloy of Law is a really lovely little book, and I think he should leave that one alone for the opposite reasons. But that's another controversial opinion for another controversial day. Because we're going to move on to hot take number 3, which is that Stormlight Archive is not Brandon Sanderson's magnum opus. It's Mistborn. Now, I said at the beginning, I am not a Stormlight or a Mistborn or a Cosmere aficionado. I have limited knowledge here, so I could be proven wrong. I know most people seem to think that Stormlight is going to be Sanderson's magnum opus. I know that Sanderson himself has said that Stormlight is his magnum opus, but still I disagree. If we're defining magnum opus as the author's greatest lengthy work that will stand the test of time, I do think that is going to be Mistborn and not Stormlight Archive. Now, I've said already that people are kind of drawn towards Sanderson's big, chunky novels. It's understandable, especially when Sanderson is saying these kind of things himself, that people would be drawn towards Stormlight as a centerpiece of all of his work. And you know, Stormlight is also a series with very high stakes, lots of Cosmere connections. It's very understandable. But for me, Mistborn is the series that has the higher possibility of being a work that comes off, that ends its story better, and will be standing the test of time going forward. And this isn't even a criticism of Stormlight Archive. I just think Mistborn is going to pull it off better. And part of this comes down to what Mistborn is trying to do as a series. I think it's really incredible the way that Sanderson is setting this whole thing up, because if you don't know what Mistborn is trying to do, is within this larger series you have 4 smaller sub-series, each is taking place in a specific time period with a specific cast of characters. Sometimes the jump between these books is going to be 200, 300 years at a time, possibly more. So you start off with this dark, maybe quasi-medieval story in the first trilogy. The second quartet is more of a cowboy western story. The next trilogy is going to be almost like an 80s noir story, I believe, and the 4th series is going to be some kind of big futuristic story. And I think this is such a great challenge for Sanderson, and I think it's one that he's particularly tailored to pull off. But it is a challenge. Like, you've got to juggle a new cast of characters each time. You've got to tell a convincing, coherent story with each trilogy and with each novel, really, in its own right. At the same time, you have to balance everything that's come before thematically. You have to carry some of the cast of characters forward and find an entertaining and justifiable reason to do that. And you've got to carry it all through this big through line at the end of book 12, 13, 14, whatever it's going to be. And then within that as well, you've got to keep the Cosmere going. Mental. It's almost like Sanderson is trying to juggle while, you know, spinning plates on his head, while trying to dance on a boulder that's rolling down a hill. There's so much he has to do in that space, and because he has these distinct little trilogies, that's a real challenge for the guy. And for me, and I know people might disagree with this, so far I think Sanderson is pulling that assignment off fantastically. I have my reservations about the first Mistborn trilogy, and I have mentioned that previously on my channel. I think Wax and Wane is some of the best stuff that Sanderson has ever done, and I think if he continues on the trajectory he is on with the Mistborn series, we're in for such a treat in the final back half of this series. I am really looking forward to it. Again, I think it's the series that's going to stand the test of time. And again, I'm not knocking Stormlight here. Oathbringer is one of my favourite books, as I've already said. I just think when all is said and done, and Sanderson's body of work is wrapped up, this is the story that is going to represent the culmination and the fruition of all of Sanderson's talent. But now we're going to wrap up with hot take number 4. Corporate Brandon is best Brandon. Now, this is something that I have been discussing recently with a number of people, including Nerd Level Rising, who I had a great live stream with. I'll link that down below. We discussed the fact that Sanderson is often seen as a corporate author or a commercial author, kind of the literary equivalent of a Big Mac or of Disney or something of that ilk. A lot of people are saying stuff like, I hate how corporate Sanderson has become. I hate how he's turned into this machine. It no longer feels pure. It no longer feels genuine. It all just feels kind of pumped out. I disagree. Give me more corporate Sanderson, please. I think it's the best of what he has to offer to the fantasy community. Now, let me kind of explain what I mean by that, because the problem is when you say Brandon Sanderson has become, let's use the word corporate, there's a lot of connotations to unpack there. There's an idea that when you say that someone has become commercial or corporate, they've kind of sold out. They've lost the heart of what they're doing. They're just putting content out for the sake of putting content out and not thinking about the quality of that content. It's all just to make money, and it's not really for the fans. Again, Disney is probably the most appropriate comparison here. But I think those connotations are erroneous. It's true that Sanderson has made a lot of money doing what he's done. It is true he has a massive empire, media team, book deals, theme park. You know, he has stuff like Dragonsteel, he's big enough to take on Audible. The man has become an empire. There is no denying that. But honestly, I think the fact that Sanderson has managed to leverage himself up into this position alongside his wife, I believe, who is, you know, his business partner, I believe is to the benefit of the fantasy community as a whole for a number of reasons. Let's go back to the Audible example. Brandon Sanderson, pretty much single-handedly, because he has so much power, is able to confront a machine like Amazon and say, listen, your Audible practices are not good enough and you need to make some drastic changes. He is opening up his Cosmere, his fantasy baby, the universe he has created, to other authors to write in. I think that's fabulous and quite selfless in a way. Yes, he's massive. Yes, he has a massive team at his back. Yes, the man, I'm sure, is making boatloads of money. But I don't think he's sold out in the way that the word corporate implies. If anything, it seems like Sanderson has become more caring and more compassionate with the community than before. And you know, he's still doing his percentage bars, he still does Q&A, he still comes on booktubers channels to have a discussion. And you could be cynical and say, listen, he's just doing that to build his media standing. But the truth is, his media standing is big enough. And you know what, as I said previously, there's also this implicit suggestion, or sometimes explicit suggestion, that the quality of Sanderson's work has suffered based on how huge he's become and the fact he now has this big media team. I think, to be honest, and listen, I don't think all Sanderson work is created equal. I just spent about 3 minutes trashing White Sand. I would argue actually that Sanderson's content is fairly consistent all the way through. One of his rockiest books is probably Elantris, and that was his first published book. In recent years we have Wax and Wane, which I've just said I love to pieces. We have stuff like Tress of the Emerald Sea, which is hugely popular with some people. Same with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. All these really wonderful works that did come out recently. I'd say Sanderson's quality is actually fairly consistent from the start of his career until now. I don't think his quality has suffered whatsoever. If anything, I love how much vision and control Sanderson still has over his stuff as he continues to blow up. I think I'm amazed by how much he's continuously giving to the community, and I think he deserves all the respect in the world for that. I mean, if anything, you could probably make the controversial opinion that Sanderson interacts a little bit too much with his fans, to be honest. So that's it for my list. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree, if you think I'm a moron, if you think I need to go back and reread something that I had a bad opinion on, or if Sanderson's for you or not for you in particular. And until then, I'll see you on the next one, and goodbye.